Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And this is to let you know that you are in the right window, in the right room at the webinar of Jordan's renewable energy potential, successes, challenges, and lessons learned. We will just wait for a couple more minutes to allow more people to get into the webinar, and we will start shortly. All right, so I think we can start. Good afternoon again, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at the Some First Institute webinar on Jordan's renewable energy potential, successes, challenges, and lessons learned. So we are happy to host this webinar today, and especially to talk about Jordan, which we have been following at the Energy Policy and Security Program for over the past years, and which has been also at the forefront of the energy discussions over the past couple of years as well. I would like to welcome first our esteemed and great lineup of panelists joining us this afternoon from around the world. So we have Engineer Amani Alazzam and Mr. Tareq Khalifeh from Jordan, Mr. Asnani from Dubai, Dr. Ali Ahmad from the United States, and Amjad Khashman from Germany. So thank you everyone for giving the time to be with us today. Before diving into the technical discussion, introducing the topic and our session today, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Joseph Bahout, IFI's director, for some introductory remarks. So Dr. Bahout, first, thank you for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'll be very brief, in fact, just to welcome you all and to say that on behalf of the Sam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut, we are, in fact, very happy to host this seminar for a series of reasons that probably you will plunge into in a few minutes. The first one has to do with the regional perspective and the comparative dimension of this webinar. As Mark said, we're trying through this program to follow other examples in the region and to drive lessons from them. Jordan has embarked very quickly, very soon, on the use of renewable energy, and it has proven a very successful choice and a very winning bet. When you compare to our situation here in the country, in Lebanon, we are talking to you today from a country where we barely have 10 hours of electricity from the official, let's say, grid. Iraq is experiencing repeated electricity cuts. And this shows that the choice of Jordan of embarking into renewables very quickly and very soon was a wise and winning choice. And this is for us a good lesson, and we have to learn from it. So on the regional perspective, I'm happy that this webinar is really opening up a comparative window, and it's also shedding a light on something we at IFI and Mark with the program on energy security is very keen on working, which is in fact the issue and the topic of renewables. The second reason why we're happy also is that through you, and some of you here represent the private and public sector, we're shedding a light on something which is also very interesting, this partnership, very seminal partnership, in fact, between the private and the public sector when it comes to energy. And this is also a lesson that we have to take from in Lebanon and elsewhere. I wouldn't reiterate the welcoming notes to all of you. Mark already did, but I would like to especially thank, of course, Engineer Amani Alazzam, who is representing the Ministry of Energy in Jordan, Mr. Tareq Khalifeh, who's representing exactly the private sector and what the private sector can bring. Mr. Asnani from IFC, who is working extensively on the Jordanian market, and our discussant, Mr. Amjad Khashman. I would also like to welcome, but also to thank our senior fellow and advisor, Ali Ahmad, who in fact is helping us a lot in steering this program on energy security. And a special thanks, of course, and congratulations to Mark Ayoub, who is today leading this program and who has in fact very successfully put this webinar on. I wish you good luck. I wish you good discussions, and I'm leaving you in the expert hands of our colleague Mark. Good luck and enjoy this webinar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bahoud, and thank you for the support in making this webinar happen and for the continuous support on the program. So indeed, as you mentioned, energy is central, and we'll kick off from where you ended. So energy is really central in the growth of the MENA region, but specifically, it was also essential in the growth of the Jordanian economy. Jordan relied over the years on imports to meet its energy demand, but this has caused, in some of the time, some challenges and exposed Jordan to some supply shocks over the years. And this has pushed the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources in Jordan to embark into the renewable energy story. And this is why today we are holding this session, since as we communicated in our event announcement, that really Jordan can be looked at as a regional front runner in renewables, and the story, or the Jordanian story, can be an important case study for all of us in the region to understand how this happened, what were the successes and the challenges, what were the challenges, and as the trend might follow in other developing countries. So we will hope that the outcomes of this session would give us real insights on how other countries should learn from the Jordanian case, what are the challenges to overcome or to bypass, and how this could happen. And as you mentioned, Dr. Bahoud, this relationship between the private and public sector is really important, and it could tell us a lot on how other countries can move forward in the renewable development. So without further ado on this, I'd like to start with our first panelist, Engineer Amani Alazzam from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources in Jordan. Engineer Amani is the Secretary General of MEMR of Jordan and the Vice Chairwoman of NEPCO, which is the Jordanian Electricity Transmission Company. Mrs. Amani has more than 30 years of experience in the Jordanian electricity sector, and she joined NEPCO focusing on the grid planning and technical studies, and she has been taking and leading in shaping the kingdom's energy, gas, oil, and shale sectors, which we'll ask you about during today's discussion. So Engineer Alazzam, first, thank you so much again, and the floor is yours to tell us more about the Jordanian renewable story, what has been done, what has been achieved, and how Jordan, or the Kingdom of Jordan, is looking to the coming decade in the energy planning and renewable energy planning. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, all. At the beginning, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for this kind invitation to the webinar, and I'm happy to be here with you today and to share with you our experience in Jordan and our success story in the renewable energy field. As Mark said, that Jordan is heavily depend on the importing energy from outside. About 90% of our energy needs is an imported one. But at the same time, I think that all of you know that Jordan enjoys world-class quality of wind and solar energy with about 300 sunny days per year, and wind speed can reach around 10 meter per second. Also, Jordan has a well-structured energy and electricity sector with a policymaker, the Energy Ministry of Energy, and the regulator, single buyer model, and private generating and distribution companies. Jordan experienced the subsequent energy shocks started from 2010 and eventually went through several tracks and measures to secure the supply resources and reach a reasonable energy mix. Over the past few years and since year 2012, Jordan has developed an attractive legal and financial framework with a good regulatory environment for the investment in renewable energy that has enabled to increase the contribution of renewable energy to the electricity mix. Now, near 2020, we reached to around 2 gigawatts from renewable energy, which is, it's about 35% from our total installed generation capacity and 20% of the consumption on our electricity consumption in Jordan, compared to less than 1% in year 2014. The total installed capacity, this 2 gigawatt, we have 33 commercial renewable energy projects with about 1.3 gigawatt. Most of these project is public-private sector projects, and we have two projects owned by the government. It's from the Gulf funds. And in addition to that, we have 723 megawatt. It's for the end users in the distribution level. It's about 24,000 system. It's in the end users side. The 1.3 gigawatt was implemented by the private sector through projects owned by through the direct proposal. In Jordan, we have more than one track to development the renewable energy projects. One of them is direct proposal or direct or an EPC contractor. We have net metering, and we have wheeling projects. We have, as I said, that we have 723 projects on the end user, which means that around 30% from our renewable energy projects, it's for the benefit of the end users. I think all of you know that according to Bloomberg Climate Scope 2019 Index, Jordan was ranked first in the Middle East and North Africa and sixth globally among 106 countries in terms of the best investment environment in the field of renewable energy. On the other side, and having all this renewable energy within short time, we start facing some challenges also. I think that the main challenges that facing in Jordan now, it's increasing the contribution due to increasing the contribution of renewable energy in the overall energy mix are limited capacity available on the grid, even on the national grid or on the distribution level. And the other thing is the negative effect caused by the fluctuation of energy generated by the renewable energy sources, which makes the operation of the system more difficult and need a lot of care, yani, to make some yeah, to be able to operate your system in an optimum way and with keeping a good stability for the system. Then to deal with that, yani by the end, all of us want to continue with having a very good renewable energy projects in Jordan and to keep our success story. Because of that, we start to deal with these challenges and find some solutions. Now there is a study being conducted to determine the visibility of constructing a large water pump storage project as a part of a solution for dealing with the renewable energy, in addition to uh, any other technology for the storage. Now, in the light of the development in energy sector and the renewable energy market in Jordan, the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources had updated the energy strategy to long term until 2030 in partnership with all stakeholders from the public and private sector. Our energy strategy main goals are to reduce the cost of energy on the national economy, diversify energy resources, increase the share of local resources in energy mix, which is the renewable energy is one of the most important local energy for us in Jordan, and increase also the energy efficiency use in the all sectors, develop the energy sector system in Jordan to make it a regional center for energy exchange by all energy forms. Under this updated energy strategy, Jordan is targeting increasing the installed capacity of renewable energy up to 3.2 gigawatt by 2030, which will contribute to around 31% of the generated electricity in Jordan. The strategy concentrated as well on the other purpose of solar energy. It should not be limited only for the electricity generation. Its use also shall be expanded in the heating application, especially concentrated heating for the use of industry, hospitals, as the commercial sectors. Moreover, we should move forward with the biogas and waste to energy project. Uh, at the end, I want uh, to thank you again for the kind invitation and to thank also all our guests for their attention, and I wish every success to this webinar, and I'm ready if there is any questions from your side.
Thank you so much, Engineer Azam, for those introductory insights. And of course, allow me just follow up in the 2 minutes remaining for the intervention before moving also to Jay. But you have really presented a great outlook of what has been done, the challenges, and the way forward. And here, just a follow-up question on what you have mentioned, the strategy, and we all know maybe that there is also the outlook, the readiness assessment by IRENA for Jordan 2030 as well. So my question is how this strategy for the 2030 and the IRENA report, which stressed on 7 key areas where Jordan has to work on to leapfrog into the renewables in the coming decade, how those strategies have targeted or tackled the challenges that you have mentioned in your intervention, the grid issue, the renewable fluctuations. Can you tell us more a bit on how those strategies would work on overcoming the challenges?
And as I said, I will talk about our strategy. Our strategy is to reach to around 31% from our energy consumption to be covered by the renewable energy. And we have more than one program to deal with that. One of them, I said, as I said, that we are now working on a visibility study for having a hydro pump storage. We are studying more than dam in Jordan to decide which is better from site, from cost, from everything. The other thing that Jordan is working on it now is to reinforcement the connection with the neighboring countries, which is very important for us to deal with this renewable energy. Now we already have a connection with Egypt. We are working now to upgrade this connection by adding a new submarine cable. We are working with the Egyptian side on that. Also, we already signed an agreement with Iraq to start the connection line, direct connection line between Jordan and Iraq. We are working to increase the capacity for the existing interconnection between Jordan and Ariha. Also, we signed a minutes MOM with Saudi Arabia to start working on preparing the visibility study already done, but we are working now to establish a legal framework for this connection and to start the implementation of the project. We believe that the interconnection is more important even than having a storage of any kind. Because of that, yani, our strategy focusing on these points, storage plus interconnection with neighboring countries.
Thank you so much, Engineer Amani. I will come back to you with other questions in the discussion and maybe if any also from the attendees. So I would like to remind our attendees today, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box and we will be happy to answer those towards the end of the discussion. Moving forward, so to Jaikishin Asnani from the IFC. So Jay is a senior investment officer at the IFC infrastructure investment team in the MENA region. Based in Dubai. He has over 15 years of experience in the infrastructure sector, of which the last 13 have been with IFC, where he has worked across the spectrum of corporate and project finance, as well as equity and quasi-equity investments. He has been covering several countries such as Pakistan, Jordan, Egypt, West Bank, Gaza, and Lebanon. And he has extensive experience with the Jordanian story. So Jay, thank you for joining, and we are happy today to have you among us to give us the financier perspective of the Jordanian story, your assessment on the Jordan experience when it comes to renewable energy from the IFC perspective. How do you think, what were the successes of this story, and what are the lessons learned from it, and how do you think we can move forward in energy planning in Jordan and other countries as well? Please, the floor is yours. You're muted, Jay.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Thanks a lot. Let me just start off by thanking Mark and the Essam Faris Institute for inviting me in this opportunity, as well as putting the webinar, this webinar together, which is obviously quite on point and a very important topic for everybody, especially more and more so in the situation Lebanon is today. So let me just start by briefly talking about giving everyone an overview of IFC's involvement in the Jordanian power sector. So our involvement in the power sector of Jordan goes all the way back from 2009, where we first provided a loan to NEPCO, which is one of the 3 private distribution companies in Jordan. And since then, the following investment was an equity investment alongside Aqua Power in SECCO. This was sort of in the summer of 2011, when SECCO, who is the incumbent electricity generator in the country, underwent a change in ownership. This was our sort of first investment in Jordan in the generation space on the equity side. Following which we partnered with the earlier developers of the Tafila wind farm in Jordan, and we worked, I mean, not myself, but colleagues with our team worked for the better part of 2 years with not just the developer, but very closely with our counterparts at NEPCO and MEMR in really developing the framework, the PPA risk allocation, the network connection contract, as well as other key project documents, which were at the heart of the project, and really sort of, as the way we see it, paved the way for these templates to be used for other wind and solar projects in the country. So that was quite a sort of defining moment, if you will, in the history of our involvement in the Jordanian power sector. And all in all, till date, we've financed 13 power projects in the country, 12 of which are renewables in solar and wind, and 1 thermal project as well, besides our involvement initially in NEPCO and the equity investment in SECCO. So I must admit, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to really support Jordan, who's a very important member country of IFC and the World Bank Group. So it's been our pleasure and privilege to support their journey over the past 10 plus years. And I personally have been working in Jordan from the SECCO equity investment days, so the better part of 10 years myself personally. I mean, in terms of lessons learned, so I think some of this has already been said, but Jordan has done, of course, extremely well in terms of creating a framework, both contractually and even legally, which has worked very well in terms of attracting many investors from all over the world, be it on the equity side as well as on the debt side. In addition, this sort of conducive environment has also allowed certain local developers to get involved in the space and really build strong capacity within the country, both in terms of project development, asset ownership, but also O&M capability, O&M and EPC capabilities, right? And I'm sure Tareq will sort of talk about that a bit more as we go along as well. So in terms of lesson learned, I think, I mean, in no particular order really, but from our perspective, the 2+ years that were spent collectively working in developing the framework for Tafila Wind Farm were quite crucial and important, and really time and money well spent. At times we see countries who don't necessarily spend this upfront time and effort for various reasons, and then it kind of slows their journey down or doesn't get lead to a good outcome. So that sort of time and effort is really worth it spending upfront, because after that, replicating such projects becomes quite straightforward. The more you do, capacity sort of there's a self-fulfilling effect there. On a similar note, it's also quite important as part of this initiative upfront to get the risk profile and risk allocation balanced and right. I mean, a term that is often used or overused is in our businesses, allocate the risk to the party who is best placed to manage or mitigate it, right? So I think one can't stress enough on how important that principle is, and for various stakeholders to keep that in mind at the onset, and to by and large, keep those principles consistent over the past many years, right? And I think, in my view, Jordan has done that quite well, right? So they've by and large managed to decided to keep the model and risk allocation framework quite consistent, which has also allowed them to procure subsequent projects quite quickly, right? So if we go back to the first round of solar projects that were done in 2014-15, they were done under a feed-in tariff regime. But once that sort of framework was implemented and successfully implemented, I think Jordan made the very sort of quick and wise decision to very quickly transition to a sort of competitively tendered model, which very quickly resulted in a drop of tariffs of less than 50%, right? So this was back in 2015-16, I think, when Jordan was able to get PV tariffs of 6 to 7 cents, which were quite close to Dubai at the time. And Dubai was at the time sort of, if I remember correctly, the leader at the time in terms of lower cost, competitively tendered solar power. So I think sort of, there's no exact science, but I think making this right decision to transition from a feed-in tariff regime to a competitive regime is quite important, and doing it at the right time makes a lot of sense and really adds a lot of value. So I think that's certainly something that Jordan did quite well, while at the same time, given that they also had to implement a lot of capacity quite quickly, while still having a parallel framework for direct proposals that was sort of available for experienced developers, and the tariffs were kind of benchmarked, right, with the competitively tendered projects. I think that the two sort of frameworks, if you will, were very well managed in parallel, and we allowed them to quite quickly ramp up capacity, right? The third thing is planning is quite important and key, right? So planning not just in terms of capacity additions, I mean, going beyond just high-level targets, but maybe going 1 or 2 levels down to figuring out, implementation schedules for different projects, and different technologies, but also transmission capacity, right? Because there are a number of countries and examples across the world where countries have done too much intermittent power too quickly to only have massive problems later on curtailment and so on and so forth, right? So getting that balance of planning and constantly revising plans, I think that's important as well, right? So it's quite important to make sure the projects and the sector is sustainable and continues to be sustainable. The other thing I would say from a lessons learned perspective is, that partnership is key, right? So I mean, people use the term PPP, public-private partnership, right? But at times you see it being used quite loosely, right? But I think it's quite important to make sure that the way these projects are developed and structured and implemented is almost a true partnership, right? So that a balance of responsibilities and risks are allocated to the private sector, but also to the governments, to the government entities, to ensure that these projects can be developed and implemented as quickly as possible and as sort of cheaply as possible, because very often people don't appreciate that the longer some of these things are kept open and the longer the development cycle goes, things happen, right? Either developers lose interest, or additional costs start to rack up, or equipment prices start going the other way, right? So we are seeing, for example, more recently, the solar PV prices have started to go in the other direction, which is sort of a bit of a first over the past many years, right? So having a true partnership at the essence is quite important, especially when it comes to very critical matters like transmission capacity or interconnection risk. That's one thing that comes to mind. Or land procurement, right? So making sure that land, I mean, this is not to say that land should always be acquired by or be provided by the public sector, but in certain instances that might actually be a quick and efficient way to do it than totally delegating the land acquisition to the private sector, right? So in some cases, especially at the onset, when a country is trying to build out its credentials and experience in this space, probably starting with something as vanilla, if you will, and simple is quite important. And then over time, you start innovating in increments, right? So to build on the economies of scale and scope is quite important. So let me just stop there and see if there's any questions either from Mark or any of the other panelists or attendees.
I will come back to you, of course. Thank you for this setting the scene on the financial aspect, on those great insights on the lessons learned. So I will come back, of course, because several questions or points you have raised in the intervention, but like kicking off from where you ended and this partnership you have mentioned, so the role of the private sector, and moving to Tareq, you have, like Jay has mentioned, a very important point when it comes to this example of partnerships between the private sector and the public sector, and the responsibility of each, and how to they can both together progress and move forward with the development of the project. So Tareq, from your perspective, from the private sector experience, I would like to say that before Tareq takes the floor, that he's the managing director of MASE, which is operating both in Jordan and the UAE. So he has a strong history in originating, developing, and operating clean energy project within the utility, but also in distributing market segments, earning also regional industry awards within renewable energy projects. So he co-founded MASE in 2013, and he is currently serving as its managing director. Tareq, based on this great background, and of course the attendees and ourselves would like to learn from you more about this private sector experience and involvement in the renewable energy in Jordan. First, how do you assess it from your end? How do you think? What were the challenges over the past decade, in your opinion? And also moving forward, how can the private sector, based on what Jay has mentioned on this partnership, how can the private sector play this, or continue to play this role, aside also in partnership with the ministry, with the regulator, in setting the targets, not only in setting the targets, but also in reaching those and implementing projects. The floor is yours, and I know you might have a couple of slides to show, so feel free to share the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Again, I'll reiterate Engineer Amani and Jay's thanks to AUB and IFI and the entire team for setting this up. I think it's high time that we have this sort of discussion, and I think Lebanon and some other countries in the region are at a point where it's good for them to learn from the experience that we've had in Jordan, and also understand what sort of lessons we've learned, but also what challenges we faced, and maybe get some insights on what sort of recommendations we have for maybe enhancing the implementation of similar programs across the region. Mark, if you don't mind, I've just prepared 3 short slides. Says that the host has disabled screen sharing. Could you please enable it so I can?
1 minute. Maybe Suzanne can just allow Tareq to share screen, please. Yes, you can do it now.
Yep. Just give me a second. All right.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, all right. So I prepared basically 3 short slides, which will guide my presentation. The first slide is basically looking back at our track record as a private sector within the renewable energy space. There's much to discuss there, but I'm going to focus on a few key points as far as key achievements are concerned and lessons learned. I think in general, just as an introduction, hearing from everyone who's presented and the general market view regionally, globally, I think there's a collective view that Jordan has done well in the past and up until relatively now, in terms of setting the stage for the integration of renewable energy capacity within its grid. I think that's, there's no challenge there. The important part from our point of view as a private sector is the big question of what's next, and we'll come to that later on. But just looking back at the track record of renewable energy developments in Jordan, as far as the private sector is concerned, I think we played a key role in building this scalable investment platform that Engineer Amani spoke about and Jay spoke about, and it's been a collective effort which has developed quite a solid, but not only solid, but also scalable investment platform. So Jay mentioned that there's been a lot of work that has been done on the Tafila wind project, and that's more or less the project that set the stage for the subsequent projects in Jordan. So that's sort of the platform that we feel as the private sector we've been an important part of. In terms of the volume of investment, we've committed as far as the private sector is concerned collectively and secured an investment volume of over $2 billion into the renewable energy space in Jordan. And that's gone to renewable energy IPP projects alone, not including commercial, industrial, and wheeling projects, which, as Engineer Amani mentioned, has exceeded 700 megawatts of installed capacity. So that's a significant amount, whether it's for Jordan or any other country in the region. What we've also been successful in doing as a private sector is making sure that the projects that have been implemented, whether it's through IPP, the investment rounds, round 1 and round 2, or through the wheeling schemes and so on, I think we've done well in making sure that these assets are well allocated and quite diverse. So if you look at these projects, you'll see quite an interesting spread of technologies, investors, contractors, lenders, operators, and they're located across different locations in Jordan. So that's something that's very important that I think we've been able to achieve. Obviously the token here is that you've seen quite an aggressive spread of pricing. So with round 1, which, as Jay mentioned, was a fixed tariff, but still with 16.9 US cents down to the what we've seen in round 3, which has unfortunately not been implemented, but we've seen the tender, we've seen the results, down to relatively small fraction of the initial pricing, so down to 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's something that again is collective, but it also shows you that the private sector has had confidence in the Jordanian market and has been, has taken the collective decision to be quite competitive. With the support, obviously, of the lenders, the community, and the public sector framework. What's also important, and something that we always stress on as a private sector, is that we've been able to really build a sustainable job platform and opportunities, whether it's through temporary jobs in construction or jobs through operations and asset management. As Jay mentioned, that's something that the private sector in Jordan has been quite involved in. Personally, myself, the company I represent, that's something that we've been focusing on. That's something that's allowed us to not only develop a track record in Jordan, but elsewhere. So that's just a short summary of what I think are the key achievements are. There are obviously a lot more, but just taking into consideration the time that's available, I thought I'd put in those 5 key achievements. In terms of lessons learned, I think in addition to what's been presented, from our point of view as the private sector, I think the key success here, or the key catalyst to success, has been what we've successfully developed from round 1 and round 2. And I'll go ahead and later on speak about next steps, but I think a key lesson that we've learned is that it's important to foster a transparent and defined and proactive relationship with all key stakeholders across the entire chain. And I think the main outcomes here is that it really manages the expectations of everyone and ensures that everyone is aligned. It also defines the roles, obligations, and relationships, and also, as Jay mentioned, properly allocates risk across the value chain. What we've learned as well is, and I think it's something that anyone looking to implement a similar program, is that it's really important to enhance and ensure the participation of stakeholders beyond the public sector. So it's really important to continue to communicate with the private sector, being developers, contractors, the entire area of private sector stakeholders, and certainly have a continued communication and relationship with lenders, because there's 3 factors to success, right? Public sector, they set the framework, and then developers and lenders take the risk and sort of investing into that framework. In terms of the status quo, where we feel we're at today, I've just put it into 3 main sections. Where we are today as renewable energy developers, I think we've seen a significant consolidation of ownership across assets. So we've seen origin sponsors, some of them exiting, some new sponsors, new investors coming on board. So that's again a sign of confidence in the Jordanian renewable energy market as of recently. Unfortunately, whether it's between round 1, round 2, and then what we've seen in the participation with the round 3 tender, local developer participation continues to be limited. I think what we've seen is, in certain countries, programs to enhance the participation of local developers and contractors. We've seen some implementation of that in Jordan, more on the contractor side, but still there continues to be limited participation of local developers and contractors within these large IPP programs. Obviously, the CNI and wheeling programs are largely driven by local developers, mostly as a BOT setup. Again, one positive point is that with all these plants, with all these assets becoming operational, EPC is leaving and so on, we're seeing a good involvement of O&M contractors, local, regional, who are starting to take over these plants. Obviously, that builds a platform for further growth regionally. In terms of the technical setup and off-taker relationship today, I think up until recently, although there have been a few hiccups, which we'll speak about, there has been generally relatively proactive relationship between IPPs and the off-taker. I think we're all aware of issues that have popped up recently, which I hope will be discussed over this session. Relatively, looking, to our neighboring countries and maybe specifically to Lebanon, compared to that, I think we have a relatively stable grid quality and operations. Again, and notwithstanding the few hiccups that we'll speak about. In terms of the general market views today, I think as far as an investment is concerned, being a developer, having made investments into the sector, these have been generally stable investments. So that's a positive point. Unfortunately, we need to be realistic. The plateau that we've reached, and I think Engineer Amani spoke about the difficulties and limitations on the grid and capacity limitations and so on. That's the reality. I mean, there's not much that can be done there. But unfortunately, that sort of leads to reduced investor appetite. Investors, private sector doesn't like to see a plateau. So that's where we're at today. The other important point is, unfortunately as well, we've seen more recently and also in the past, reputational issues with renewable energy in Jordan. So we've even seen a systematic attack publicly on renewable energy projects in Jordan. So that's unfortunately a market view that is prevailing today. In terms of looking ahead, I thought I'd arrange it as opportunities and key challenges. I think, as I mentioned, as a private sector, we are just at this point taking a sit and wait approach. We note and we've seen the energy strategy, which from a renewable energy point of view is honestly not that interesting. We know that MEMR has chosen to go towards the route of high dependency, that scenario that's clearly set out in the strategy, and not go through the route of increasing sustainability. So that was a clearly defined scenario in the strategy, which unfortunately was not chosen as the driver for the next 10 years. So from a renewable energy point of view, that means limitation on further development, although the strategy, and as Engineer Amani described, there are opportunities. We hope to see an addition of 800 megawatts of renewable energy capacities over the next 10 years. That's noted, and I think there is a certain level of interest there and excitement. And we've seen that the strategy plans to set up regulatory platforms for contemporary technologies like energy storage and so on, although we haven't seen that yet. The strategy said that we should have seen it in 2020, but I'm sure we will see it soon. And that should set the stage for implementing contemporary technologies into the grid, which is something as a private sector I think everyone is excited about if it does happen. And I think in general, Engineer Amani mentioned that the strategy was developed with the participation of key stakeholders. That's true. But again, we hope to continue to be involved in the implementation of the strategy, maybe even propose pivoting away from the strategy, or being involved in a dynamic process which continues to evaluate the strategy where it is, and maybe try to introduce some reasonable changes to make sure that the private sector continues to be involved, to make sure that the private sectors continue to be interested and excited about renewable energies in Jordan. On to the key challenges, the last part of my presentation here. Again, yes, we have been involved in shaping the strategy, but there has been, from our point of view as a collective private sector, that involvement has been limited. Although if you look back at round one, at Tafila, the involvement of the private sector, having the private sector sit on the same table as the public sector, the lenders, and so on, is a key to success. So we hope to see that, but that's a key challenge. Today, there's no real platform for that sort of discussion, or a sustainable platform. We're sometimes invited to discuss thoughts, to discuss strategies and so on, but that happens on an ad hoc basis. There's not really a platform which allows us to present our views on a continuous, uninterrupted basis. So I hope that's a key challenge for us as a private sector. We need to go through certain challenges to make our voice heard, which is sometimes challenging. Again, the fact that there are reputational issues with the renewable energy, there's an issue with the public sentiment. And I think there's a collective responsibility, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, other stakeholders, to make sure that public sentiment is enhanced and is improved, and is the key advantages, the key positive points of renewable energy are well communicated to all stakeholders. We've seen, certainly, I think there's no denying inconsistency across regulatory framework. A very small example is, MEMR says that they want to boost the integration of electrification across transportation and so on, but we don't see a similar effort across the regulatory chain. So we don't see a similar effort across, whether it's customs regulations, tax regulations, that ensure that view is well implemented. So that's a hurdle that unfortunately we deal with. Commercial lending across mostly IPP. Wheeling, yes, they've been involved, but mostly IPP, there's been limited involvement for commercial lending. Typically, sorry, Jay, commercial lending is sometimes more competitive. So we'd like to see that involvement later on. But that's a key challenge today. A key challenge, but also an opportunity, is for Jordanian developers, contractors, and operators to pivot beyond Jordan and leverage our experience that we've built over the past few years. And there are a few successful examples also of Jordanian companies doing that. So I hope that's sort of a good.
Thank you. A very good presentation, and I think you pointed up to a lot of important issues which I hope we will come back to shortly in the discussion. Thank you so much, Tareq. Of course, we'll come back to you. Moving to our discussants, and to benefit also from their insights on what has been discussed until now in the webinar, but also on other issues that are of importance for the attendees. So Amjad Khashman is a researcher and fellow, a PhD student at the Technical University in Germany. So has been covering and analyzing the renewable energy market in the MENA at large and in Jordan in specific over the past 3 years, writing in PV magazine. And the idea from also he has been very supportive in setting up this webinar, and I will be sharing now a piece that in the chat box, a piece that Amjad has written back in January, I think, in the PV magazine about the renewable energy potential in Jordan. And then we have been discussing the idea of holding this webinar. So thanks, Amjad, for the support on this. And I leave the floor to you to first tell us your thoughts about what has been discussed. How do you assess the story from your end? I know you have tackled the challenges in the Jordanian experience in your piece, but how do you look at it also from your perspective, the way forward, and some specific issues also, which I will ask you shortly later on about specific issues that the piece includes. So please, Amjad, the floor is yours.
Sure, my pleasure, Mark. First of all, thank you so much for your support during organizing also the event. And thanks also to our attendees. Actually, today I have seen so many questions and they are being active for us. So I urge them to continue with us and hope we can also answer their questions very soon. So actually, I will start from where Tareq just finished, which is, let's say, the public sentiment. Till now, we have discussed the market from the point of view of the officials, governmental, then we moved to financiers and private sector. But I feel till now, we didn't really concentrate on consumers, because at the end, the consumers are the, let's say, the central piece of the whole energy puzzle we are discussing today. So in any energy policy, let's say, affordability is something very important. And that's why maybe can affect the current public sentiment in Jordan. Because for any consumer, including households or industrial consumers, right now what they want to see is no price increase, and of course no removing of the current subsidies for the least fortunate consumers. So of course that will hinder the public acceptance of renewable energy technologies, because it's true we have seen tremendous growth in the past few years, but if we talk about the total system cost, that wasn't really reflected into prices of electricity for consumers. Another very important aspect for consumers is transparency, because right now when you see your grid, your let's say energy bill or electricity bill in Jordan, you can't really differentiate how much was paid for generation, how much were the grid fees, whether it's transmission or distribution. So I think transparency right now is also from the point of view of consumers. It's very important to engage them with us and to continue the success story in Jordan. My last point, which I will also connect it when you were talking about consumers, will connect it with the current, I would say, gridlock that we have. The overcapacity in the grid is also to engage more consumers, especially the large one. I see the need to do some market reforms, and mainly to start to think to implement some dynamic pricing or specific time, let's say real-time pricing of electricity, which is right now is a must after the exponential growth of renewable energy we have seen in Jordan. So the energy or the electricity landscape is not the same anymore. We can't just keep managing the grid the same way we did it in the past 4 or 5 decades, because the nature of the intermittent and variable renewables, they put new challenges, as also Her Excellency Engineer Amani said. So yeah, so of course we need market reforms, and actually I saw one of the questions from the attendees asking about that. Just to put things into perspective, if we, for example, if we talk about 2019 and just calculate how much renewable energy capacity was implemented, and taking the capacity factor, what is their potential generation, that would leave the rest of fossil fuel generation of around 4 gigawatts only working for 50% of the time. So this exponential increase in supply wasn't really met with such increase in demand. So we have now overcapacity, and as far as I know, it's take or pay contracts for these conventional generations. So again, NEPCO, which is owned by the government or the people, is being hit with losses in that regard. So this is also something to keep into mind. So how to solve, how to get out from this gridlock, let's say, or this situation. The most obvious action would be to try to increase demand, whether by electrifying mobility sector, or whether by trying to have new applications of water desalination. We are seeing now some plans into that direction. Then I think the most integral part from energy economics point of view is to have this dynamic pricing, or there is nothing right now, I think in the era of energy transition, there is nothing called flat rate electricity rate, because it's keeps changing. During noontime, we have so much electricity. The price of electricity is lower because we have so much demand, so much supply. So this dynamic pricing, it should be included. We have talked about it in the consumer side. So now in the generation side, I think any future PPAs for renewable energy projects, it shouldn't be any more flat rate. It should be more changing during the generation profile during the day, and also seasonally. This is not only in Jordan, for example. We have seen United Arab Emirates in their latest auction system. They had that also. So it's not anymore like just take or pay and flat rate or flat tariff for the whole lifetime of the project. When we talk about conventional assets, I see the next step should be that we need more flexibility in this take or pay contracts to allow to integrate more of renewable energy generation. But at the same time, we had a recent accident or incident in the grid. It's very critical, as Engineer Amani said, to how to maintain the grid and to encourage or to have some incentives for these fossil fuel generators. I believe that there should be some capacity market for must-run power plants, the power plants that keep the system. And also, we have seen it in other countries to have a balancing reserve market, which is basically a way to have a backup generation in any case where you have renewable generation is not in place, so you have some backup. And this will be also an incentive to encourage such fossil fuel generators to stay in the market, actually. So from my point of view, these are some pressing issues. This is how we can move forward. I totally agree that the growth of renewables in Jordan was amazing. It was actually many lessons or a successful experience to transfer to other countries. But right now we have an overcapacity in the grid, and we should try to solve this issue. And I hope such steps will open the road to get rid actually from the single buyer model to have more wholesale market, and maybe, we never know, maybe an energy exchange also.
Sure. And this is really important, the point you have raised when it comes to the consumer perspective, because sometimes when it comes to energy planning, we focus on the other areas, but at the end of the day, we forget about the consumer aspect of it. So thanks again for all the insights. We will maybe come again to you to discuss some of the challenges you have raised and how we can learn from them for the coming decade. Moving last but not least to Ali and Dr. Ali Ahmad, joining us from Harvard, from the United States today. So he's a senior fellow, of course, at the Alazzam Ferris Institute, but also an energy policy scholar at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and he's senior consultant at the World Bank, advising on energy and extractive industries global practice issues. He has been focusing in his work on studying the political economy of Lebanon's electricity sector, energy systems, and climate change. So thank you so much, Ali, for joining and for all the support on this. And really, after listening to all those important insights from the panelists and from discussants, we'd like to hear from your end first on your perspective on the Jordanian story, but the most important also issue, and since, as I mentioned, you have been extensively working on Lebanon's case and Lebanon's renewable energy. So what are the lessons learned, in your opinion, that Lebanon should take from or learn from the Jordanian story in his energy planning, since we are really a very nascent now country, or a very nascent sector when it comes to policies, plans, or renewable energy planning. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on this, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be part of this wonderful lineup of speakers. I did learn a lot, and I thought all the interventions continued great information. Apologies, my laptop decided to die today, so I'm connecting you through my phone. I hope you can see me and hear me okay. I know, Mark, that you asked me to talk about Lebanon, but I could not resist listening to the insights that have been shared to actually perhaps think of two observations to comment on the Jordanian case before I talk about Lebanon. I mean, the first thing I would like to say is that Jordan and its public administration really deserve congratulation. Because let's remember, this is a country with serious financial problems, economic strains. And unlike other countries in the region with deep pockets and arguably access to the best consulting companies, Jordan has managed to be a leader in the region, despite many challenges. Granted, Jordan has benefited a lot from support of international community, World Bank, IFC, and other development partners, but it takes two to tango. So clearly, this support was possible because there was a receptive government and a government that is willing to engage and make progress. And reflecting on Lebanon, this is something that we sorely miss, to have this other side of the story, where in the case of Lebanon, we do have willing international partners to help, but unfortunately, we do not have an internal partner or internal side that can meet those external support mechanisms. I think the second point I would like to highlight, which came across a lot, not only in today's discussion, but generally speaking, when people talk about Jordan, is this concept of energy diversification. And I completely understand the importance of energy diversification for a country like Jordan, especially for a country like Jordan, which has historically suffered a lot of dependency issues. However, I think it's important to add nuance to the concept of energy diversification and understand that it does have other trade-offs that we should be aware of. I mean, we have a trade-off on energy security. So for example, when you include generation assets that use natural gas, you have to bring this natural gas from somewhere, and this makes you dependent on this side. When we talk about energy diversification, we might think of adding energy assets that are too expensive. I know for Jordan, for a long time, they were talking about the nuclear option. I am really delighted that the nuclear option has slowly been fading away from the public narrative in Jordan. And I think this is absolutely the right step to take. But let's not forget that for a long time, Jordan promoted nuclear energy. And we all know that the economics of nuclear, let alone other safety and security issues, are really not favorable, especially when you compare the cost of nuclear to the cost of other alternatives, such as renewables and natural gas. When we talk about energy diversification, also we talk about environmentally damaging options that we can add, such as the oil shale option. Again, so all I'm trying to say is energy diversification by itself needs a bit more of dissection and going further into what are the priorities and what are the constraints that we have to define this energy diversification policies. So on Jordan as well, Mark, really, I mean, I really loved the presentations, all the presentations, but particularly of Tareq and Amjad. I think they have highlighted important issues that I would call really possibilities that I would strongly encourage Jordan and all the countries in the region to follow. The first one is we see a lot of focusing on government-led projects and initiatives and policies. I think now is the time to engage more citizens into this energy transition. I mean, in terms of energy, distributed energy pose an important side. I know that Jordan has been doing some work on that, but I think there is a lot of work to be done. And we talk about private sector, private citizens are private sector too, not only corporates and developers. The second point, I think it was also mentioned by Amjad, is to also look at demand management policies and solutions. This is something that is very important. When we talk about energy, we always talk about adding supply and adding generation and all this, building infrastructure. And I think indeed, like sometimes there is no way but to do that. But at the same time, there's also some emphasis that need to be placed on energy efficiency. And I'm glad Engineer Amani has highlighted energy efficiency as one of the pillars of the policy. But more can be done, as Amjad has rightly mentioned, more perhaps can be done on the demand management side. And of course, just one anecdotal note here from my work on the nuclear program in Jordan 5 years ago. I realized that there is an overestimation of demand. And I think this is very critical, not only to Jordan, but to other countries where this overestimation of demand, because demand is like a compound interest, like it's a compound number. So even if you overestimate demand by 1 or 2% over 10, 15 years, the difference can be huge. So sometimes a lot of projects are justified, or future expansion of the grid can be justified based on this demand. And we know in the case of Jordan, the projected demand did not really match the realistic demand. So again, here, I think maybe we need to rethink that as well. Moving to Lebanon, and I don't want to take a lot of time because I know Mark and others are keen to take questions from the audience as well. I think the Jordanian case really shows some 2-3 important remarks that Lebanon should take into account. I mean, the first thing that is striking is just how centrality in decision, centrality and stability and clear vision of decision-making can make a big difference. In Lebanon, we have a diffuse decision-making that even in the case of consensus on a policy plan, that the implementation is often hindered or delayed. We don't see that in Jordan. I think that really talks to the Lebanese case that moving forward, we do need a clear vision that we have a consensus over not only the policy numbers and the targets, but also the implementation mechanisms. I think that's super important in order to avoid future delays. The second important comparison point is the role of clear regulatory framework. I know that Amjad and others have called for more transparency, and I think you can argue that in any country in the world, you can always ask for more transparency. There is not enough transparency. So, but I think Jordan has done a great job, really. This is something that Lebanon can really benefit from. Specifically, we do need a regulator. We do need a regulator that can engage with the private sector, as Tareq mentioned, that can give confidence to the private sector, that can manage expectations. I like this term used by Tareq, managing expectations of everybody, because right now we don't have such an environment in Lebanon. And the last, I think, lesson is about the stranded assets or stranded PPAs. I think Jordan maybe get criticized, but I don't think it should be criticism, because Jordan is learning, and Jordan, you don't progress if you don't do mistakes and if you don't learn from your mistakes. So for me, some of the setbacks in the Jordan experience are not necessarily setbacks, are perhaps opportunity to learn from and move forward. And when you have renewables with natural gas and other assets, and you have different regulatory frameworks, then there's a question of harmonization. There's a question of how can you make these frameworks talk to each other, and how can you make a coherent policy? And this is something we can learn from, like how would the PPAs in Jordan and the gas PPAs would be managed in the future to incorporate more renewables, or not to strand renewables out. I think that would be great lesson learned for Lebanon. And moving also the single buyer model, which Amjad referred to, it did show some limitations in the Jordanian case, which we should also consider. But I think I just would like to end by saying Jordan has a lot to offer Lebanon. And I think the private sector in particular in Jordan has a lot to offer Lebanon. So I really encourage Tareq and his colleagues in the private sector in Jordan and also our colleagues from the Lebanese side to start talking to each other. I think there is a lot of potential for transfer of knowledge and transfer of expertise that goes beyond government to government cooperation. I think there's a lot of potential there. I will stop here and hopefully engage with questions later. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Ali, for all the insights. Really, really important and on spot to the point. I have a lot of questions which from the audience, and I also encourage everyone, if you still have any question, please put it in the chat box, in the Q&A box, and we will be happy to answer those. Engineer Amani, I have a lot of questions directly targeting you, but I'd like to start with the most important ones maybe, and hopefully later come back. So we have a question in the Q&A box asking, are there any future plan for integrating smart grid technologies on national grid? This is the first one. If you'd like, you can answer, and then I can follow up with the second question.
Okay, and of course, going to the smart grid is one of the main action plans that we have in our strategy, and we will start that by converting to a smart meters to the end users, and that's what Amjad talking about it, because we believe that to have a better management for the renewable energy, we need to have these smart meters to convert to the time use tariff, especially for the domestic sector, where they can manage their loads more than the others. As Amjad said also, that we have a lot of renewable during day, especially that we said that around 30% from our renewable energy is for the end users. And for the end users, it's all of it is solar. We have a lot of solar during day, but we don't have that during evening. Because of that, we need to manage that well by having a smart meter on the end user side.
Thank you, Engineer Amani. The second question is from Yazan Fanous in the chat box. So is there, he's referring to the 1 megawatt limit that has been added to recently over in the past 2 years. So is there a timeline for lifting the 1 megawatt limit? And also, is Jordan planning to move on to a transitional or multi-buyer model in the short or medium term?
About the 1 megawatt, we are studying now all the solution to be able to have more renewable. But I want to say that the main reason behind this decision was that we have a limited capacity on our grid. Then we want more people, more end users to get the benefit of having renewable energy and reduce their bills. And really, according to our strategy, it was planned to reach to around 2.7 gigawatt by 2025. According to the existing approvals that we have it now and the undergoing projects, we will reach to more than that, maybe 2.9 or 3 gigawatt. But we are working on all solutions to find a solution to have more renewable energy. And also, I want to mention that according to our strategy, the new projects, when we are talking about 3.2 up to year 2030, it will be for the end users more than for the public.
A third point, also directly, we know that Jordan has plans for the shale oil plans, and the question is, to what extent those plans that have been, like we have been hearing about over the past also 2 years, and also we know that we have an oil shale program, to what extent this could affect or impact the strategy of or the investments in renewable energies. So this reliance on those.
The oil shale plant is under commissioning now, and it's part of our strategy. And when we are talking about 3.2 gigawatt from renewable, we're taking in consideration this project because we have also a retirement for other conventional power plants. We have a retirement for around 300 megawatt by end of this year, and by 2025 we have a retirement for around also 400 megawatt. Then all that is taken in consideration in our strategy. It's not a new point.
Thanks again. I will maybe come back in a second round. Jay, a question or two questions. Let me combine them. You have mentioned something during your intervention, and then a point that was raised also by Ali in his last point about the importance of a regulator, and you have mentioned the importance of having a regulatory framework in place, and this relationship that is strong also between the public and private. So based on your experience, to what extent the regulator has helped in developing or in reaching those targets over the years? How do you assess this experience? And the second part is something that Tareq has mentioned, is about the investment appetite that is reduced. Do you feel that from a financier perspective, is that really happening because of the challenges that were mentioned, or it is something that could be overcome if plans and visions were put in place again? We cannot hear you, Jay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks. So on the first question regarding the regulator, I mean, I think, having a regulator, is obviously quite important, right? Now, from in our involvement at a project level, as lenders and equity investors, our direct interaction with the regulator tends to be a little limited, rather, right? But and from again sitting at a bit of a distance as a lender, usually the involvement that we see from the regulator is more to do with things like issuing generation licenses and so on. I'm talking specifically about power, about IPPs, right, or just power plants in general. But I think taking a step back and sort of a high-level view, having a regulator and regulatory framework, especially when it comes to things that may happen downstream in the electricity value chain, right? When it comes to ensuring service quality standards, be it on the government-owned distribution companies or the privately owned distribution companies, or ensuring that sort of the tariff structure and framework. And what I mean by that is the end user tariff, distribution level tariff framework works well is quite important, right? So we're looking at initiatives in other countries, for example, in mini grids, right, where it becomes quite important to ensure that the tariffs mechanisms work, and the variable costs that for the private sector are also appropriately compensated, right? So, and it's things like these where a regulator can be quite important to ensure that the various stakeholders, be it the private sector party or kind of the lenders by extension, or the consumers, and even the government, sort of do their part when it comes to ensuring visibility on tariffs being sustainable, and wherever subsidies are required, subsidies are being provided in a meaningful way and for the right reasons. On the second question, which is regarding investor appetite, so I think yes. From our perspective, I won't say that as IFC, we have less appetite in Jordan to do more investments in the power sector. I think given that how much capacity has been added in Jordan already, right, and plus how much exposure we as IFC already have, we are taking a cautious approach right now, right, in terms of really understanding and trying to get a sense. And I know Engineer Amani mentioned work has been done and continues to be done from the government side, right, from a sort of planning perspective. But our approach is to make sure and be watchful when it comes to supporting further investments, because what we are mindful of is making sure the investments we support are sustainable for the country, right, and are not just adding megawatts and adding to the government's sort of burden, right? So I gave an example of certain other countries where a lot of renewable energy capacity, and this is sort of going back 15, maybe 20 years ago, in certain countries in Europe, where a lot of capacity was added in the renewable energy space at relatively expensive tariffs and in a bit of a uncontrolled manner, right? And that's obviously something that we as IFC don't want, right? So we are quite careful that, and anyway, I don't think, to my knowledge, there are any new IPPs being planned imminently or coming to market in Jordan. But whenever they do come, I think we would certainly want to ensure and look more carefully that how they fit within the country's generation plans, how do the economics work, right, and how do those projects sort of support or help the power sector in the country in general, to make sure that we're comfortable supporting it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jay. I have two questions also quickly. I know we are running out of time, but two questions to Amjad and one question to Tareq from what I've been receiving. So starting with the one to Tareq, also Engineer Amani has mentioned, and you have mentioned in the presentation, that there are now plans and the vision calls for electrifying or the electrification of activities when it comes to even transport and industry, etc. what is the role of the private sector here, and how can they diversify the know-how? Do you think, or do you believe the private sector is ready to embark in this electrification process in terms of expertise, know-how, and how do you assess the role of the private sector in those activities moving forward?
All right, thank you, Mark. I think that's a good question. You know, the private sector is always fueled by challenge. So I suppose if the opportunity is available, if the regulatory framework is actually in place to make sure that the private sector is comfortable to make sustainable investments into the space, I think the private sector will go ahead and do so. In terms of local capabilities, I think whether it's local project developers, contractors, suppliers, or operators, you know, across the chain, I think we've proven that as a local Jordanian, you know, across that chain, as local Jordanians, we are up to the challenge when it's presented to us. So I think if the opportunity is there, if it makes sense, if it's framed correctly from a regulatory point of view, I think, yes, we will rise to the challenge. And the private sector will definitely engage into that potential electrification of whether it's industry, commercial, transportation. You know, I think that's the future, right? And we, you know, 10 years ago, we realized that solar and renewables were the future, and you know, based on the title of this webinar, we did quite a good job. So I think we can definitely replicate that for electrification.
Just building on what you'd mentioned, I think I have a question from Razan Rashid. I think it's coming maybe from academia or academic background, but she's asking, what do you think is the proper area of research in this manner? I mean, if we're going or talking about electrification, how can maybe academia or research in the energy sector or in renewables support in this, or is it more case studies, economic studies, or technical? How do you think academia could support you as private sector as well?
I think it's a combination of everything that you've mentioned. I think we've always, all of us have relied on academia whenever we have a thought or a business case that we'd like to implement. You know, our sector is mostly technical driven, so it's important that academia has a significant role and plays a good role. And I think you know, the academia can be involved across the value chain.
Mm-hmm. You have a follow-up question from Ali. Ali Ahmad. He's asking you, who is campaigning against renewables in Jordan?
Well, it's not someone specific. I think you know, there's a combination of different fractions within the public sentiment platform that have unfortunately played a significant role in weakening public sentiment towards renewables. I think it's also our fault as well as the private sector, but also there's a collective responsibility, like I said, that includes private sector, public sector, and so on, to make sure that everyone understands where renewables stand in Jordan, highlight the positives, because today the negatives are sort of clouding the judgment. But you know, it's not a specific entity or a specific fraction of the society. But I mean, you just Google renewable energy in Jordan, and you'll definitely see some. Not obviously not all of it, but you'll see some negative sentiment there.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tareq. Amjad, building on what you have mentioned on the consumer's perspective, what you have presented. So we know that Jordan has done a lot of work on the net metering and power wheeling activities, and there, like most of, as the numbers show clearly, that the residential or the people have realized the importance and have implemented some renewable energy projects or for their own use. So how do you think first about this scheme, the net metering and powering? Do you think there are some improvements to be done? This is the first part of the question. And second, and this is coming from also from the audience, your assessment on or your thoughts on the future growth of energy storage or the role of energy storage in Jordan, in the Jordanian case, moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent questions. So for net metering, actually, I think the current scheme it's amazing. I think it was a very successful case. It allowed so many citizens, and also there was governmental support through financing and so on through a specific fund called JREF. So if we are talking about net metering, it was an excellent option, and it allowed many citizens to have their own solar PV system, and I hope it continues at the same pace. There were some challenges regarding application process with distribution companies and so on. So maybe this can be made easier in a certain way, automatized or structured, like made in a standard way. As for the first question, the second question about energy storage. I think it needs technical assist, like you need a feasibility study, you need a whole system modeling for the whole year and so on. Engineer Amani mentioned pump hydro. It might have potential, but Jordan already has a huge issue with water. I'm not sure what is the real potential, but we are seeing it. For example, in United Arab Emirates, they are building a huge plant. Also across the borders, the Israelis are also building a huge pumped hydro storage. So it's a proven technology. It's the cheapest storage technology, but I'm not sure if it's the best option in Jordan. I do believe that certain market design measures and certain flexibilities through demand and new applications might be even more feasible than storage at this stage. But again, you need a deep technical analysis to know the right answer.
Thank you so much, Amjad. Engineer Amani, one final thing before maybe closing the session, but you have mentioned something, I think, in the early stage of this discussion about the grid interconnection with other countries of the region, and the question is asking about, are there any plans or are there any readiness to support maybe Lebanon with in those grid interconnections or to transfer electricity? I think it's coming from the crisis, from the current crisis we are living.
Already we have a connection line with Syria, and Syria have a connection line also with Lebanon, but the connection line between Jordan and Syria is now out of service due to some technical issues. If this line is available, of course, we will happy to do that.
We hope so. So I know like this discussion could continue further, but I'm really sad and obliged to stop here, and because of time constraint. But again, this was really a very important discussion which we could build on, and I hope it's not I know it's the first, but I hope it's not the last, and we should continue shedding the light and stressing on those issues from other regions, from Jordan and other regions, just to learn, building also on what Dr. Bahoud has said. We are living in a deep electricity crisis. Iraq has been in a blackout a few days ago, and this gives us again an idea on how the region should cooperate and collaborate and learn from those experiences. So having said that, I would like to thank you all again. Engineer Amani, thank you so much for your time. Tareq, Jay, Amjad, and Ali. It was really a great pleasure having you all at the Isam Fares Institute, and we hope to host you again, hopefully in the coming future, to discuss specific topics and specific issues when it comes to the Jordanian case. So thank you all again. Thank you for all the attendees for the questions, insights, and they stayed with us until this time. So thanks again. Thank you all, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Take care.